Welcome to Mythical Phylogeny Adventures. I'm your guide Jason. Probably one of the most fascinating facets of a fantasy world are the incredible ecosystems which arise. I've already looked at underground ecology, but today I want to look up to the flying islands of the sky. Now, before we even begin, we need to address a few things. Namely, that not all flying islands are the same. And no, I'm not talking about big islands and small islands, but as with real estate, it comes down to location, location, location. And here's where I want to look at normal islands in our world. What determines the ecology of the island? And the biggest factor is how close it is to other land masses. This is what has led to areas like Hawaii and the Galapagos having such unique animals on them. So, how do plants and animals arrive on islands? And there are a couple of options, but the best is to start with plants. As you know, most plants disperse their seeds and rely on wind to carry them. A few species are able to get their seeds into the jet stream and the air currents. This requires getting the seeds into a strong upstream. If you want to fully understand this, you'll need a meteorologist to help you. Short version, there are a few places where the air naturally flows from the ground level to the highest parts of the atmosphere, and this can help carry the seeds thousands of miles or kilometers easily. In addition, seeds floating on the ocean, driftwood, and being carried by birds and other such methods are also common, but more limited in distance, except for birds. They have an extra facet which I'll need to get to. By floating in water, it'll be slow and requires more luck getting there. So, it limits the number and variety of species which will arrive on the island. There is a natural order to ecological succession. One plant shows up first, usually lichen, and then is replaced by grasses, then shrubs and trees. Then the trees will go from one species to the next. This is done to prepare the soil, secure it for the roots of the next plants to be put down, and necessary nutrients. So, just because certain seeds arrive, it doesn't mean that the ground is right for the seeds. Though sometimes you can skip steps, but that can be rare. The first animals to arrive are usually birds, since they fly. Usually things like albatross, terns, and other birds like that which spend much of their lives over the ocean. Now, these different birds mostly eat things like fish and crustaceans, but will still pick up seeds in their feathers. Throw in a few other birds which cross the ocean that do eat seeds, and they become a high vector for bringing plants to the island. After that, most animals are more difficult. How did iguanas get to the Galapagos Islands? Well, a population once got stranded on driftwood, which literally floated there, and this limits what animals would arrive on the islands. Okay, so what does all this have to do with flying islands? What is it going to take to get plants and animals onto these islands? Well, we can use some of the same methods, minus the driftwood. Earlier, I mentioned the importance of locations. So, where are floating islands? Well, we can put them anywhere, including over other land masses. If a floating island is over land, that means birds and insects will have no problem getting to the island. And with them will come plenty of seeds. This means that you will see a wider variety of plants growing on these islands. But there is an issue. What do plants need to grow? I know, I love these kinds of questions. And the answer is water. Would floating islands have any water on them? Would they have lakes, ponds? Well, they need a water source. And there are two potential options here, rainfall and melting snow. Do you see the problem? How often will it rain? That will depend on the climate. Snowmelt is another story. All that it would take would be for the island to be high enough that the snow would remain year-round. Outside of those two conditions, it is highly likely that floating islands may be dry, unless they are big enough to have a lake, which would be critical if we are going to have larger plants or even trees. Potentially, more arid plants would thrive on these islands. We are looking more to grasses and sagebrush covering them. So, it is unlikely that you could use them as a form of vertical farmland. Due to the floating island's location, we can expect a large bird population to form. These would be ideal for them to have their nests. If they are high enough from the ground, it would prevent things like cats from reaching them. Rodents are a bit more complex. there is a chance that another bird could carry them up to the floating islands. Now, there might be a reason that they would do this. Small rodents and reptiles can be used to eat small insects and parasites, which can create problems for birds. We actually see some species of owls doing this with small garter snakes in their nest in our world, though other birds could just as easily serve this purpose as well. But it is unlikely that larger animals will come to the floating islands. If there is some sort of vine linking the island to the ground, maybe they could get up, but that isn't a guarantee. Of course, just like with Hawaii, humans and other sentient races could bring them to the island, and that could have the same disastrous results. This is why Hawaii has some strict laws about bringing animals to the islands. Islands tend to have a very specific ecosystem. When new predators are introduced, it has no natural predators or competition. The animals won't know how to deal with the newcomer, and it can quickly decimate the entire ecosystem. So, human intervention can be a problem, and they will need to keep the environment under control. It will require care when they explore these islands, else you run the risk of contaminating the ecosystem. There is an interesting facet to floating islands. Normally, islands don't have a bottom, but here they do. That means plants and animals can take advantage of this. Cliff swallows and bats would both be a prime choice for such a location. You also have mosses and lichens that will flourish here. And this brings up an oddity about birds and trees. Some birds prefer different locations in the tree to roost and nest. And we can see the same thing here. Some birds would live deeper on the floating island, and others on the fringes. In addition, these places would be ideal for winged mythical creatures, such as griffins. This would also provide them a good launching platform to address the difficulty with taking off. Now, this kind of terrain offers a perch for predators. It lets them have a safe point where they can watch and wait. And while you are traveling, you will need to keep an eye on these floating islands. Potentially, roads might avoid them. And they could create issues for the land below. If they are a large enough floating island, that will block out the sun for the land below. This would create a shadowy area, which is cooler during the day, maybe nice in a desert. And if it is low enough, heat would radiate off the floating island at night to create a warmer place. If you are sandwiched between it and the ground, again, that might be a nice place. These places would be different with snow and rain. They may not get as much directly, but depending on the environment, maybe it will drop down or create a seasonal waterfall. So, there may be benefits around them. And there is one final thing to address. Where do these flying islands come from? New landmasses are slow to appear in our world. But in a fantasy world, things sometimes happen abruptly. Flying islands defy logic, and are likely going to be caused by some magical calamity. Now this means that these landmasses come from the ground, and if that happens, there is a chance that there were larger animals on the island as it started to float. And this is going to be a death sentence. Not for them, but of any chance of a population staying alive. This is going to create a population bottleneck. There is likely not going to be any influx of fresh genetics, and each generation will likely become increasingly inbred. The only exception would be if the floating island is large enough to maintain a sufficiently large population. If it happened long enough ago, you may see some evolution. Likely, this would end up being similar to high altitude evolution. However, this could also be a place where humans could settle. This would be a difficult place to live in siege. You may be hard pressed to get water up there, and you'll need to send people down to collect the water and bring that back. And this means that a siege is bad here. You will need to stock up on water in addition to food. So, unless you can get rain and snow, you'll likely end up being very limited in time. So no, these would actually be a bad place to use for a fortress. So, what else would humans use them for? I already said that farmland is unlikely, so that is probably out. What about houses and stores? Well, we got the same problem with water and sewage as a castle. But a storehouse is another story. You are just putting things there for later. So, people won't be living there, only visiting and leaving. By putting it up high, it will help protect it from vermin and other predators. Only things which can fly would be able to get there, which makes perfect sense. In addition, these would be the perfect place to place an aerial port for skyships. This would require a certain level of magical technology, but that will be pretty much required to make these places accessible. These places allow flying ships of all sizes to access the port easier, and they can come from multiple angles with greater ease. The ecology of flying islands isn't exactly the same as regular islands, but still faces many of the same issues. Their uses might be limited due to access to water. Still, I am sure that people would find a use for it. They always adapt. Thank you for watching, adventurers. Please return next time. Until then, I'll see you on the roads.